All right, Stranger Things, part one. I'm going to be going over some spiritual aspects of Stranger Things, some of the negative permission slips that exist, but also the positive solutions. So, hi, I'm Cassandra Finch. I'm also known as your millennial spirit guide, also the owner of Phoenix School of Alignment, and I love breaking down horror movies and shows like this to give you the actual spiritual negative permissions and solutions so that any type of fear programming doesn't land in your system. Around Will Byers and him getting stuck in the upside down. So the reason why this is extremely important is because Will is really young. So when we look at kids, they are very open. They don't have the same amount of filters that adults do, especially when it comes to spirits, things that they can see. A lot of kids can see so many things that a lot of adults cannot based on that perspective. So Will, he's already playing D&D with his friends. He's ready to go home with his other friends. They're all biking together. They get into a race, and Will ends up coming across a Demogorgon when he's alone. So he wins the race. He's going real fast, and he comes across the Demogorgon. It freaks him out. He falls off his bike, and then he races home. What I love so much about the show is that they play with the psychology of fear as well as the permission. So these ideas that we subconsciously carry, what we're allowed to do or allowed to be, and there's just so many things to go over. So when the Demogorgon comes into play and Will is ambushed by him, I mean, his fear and panic were overwhelming. Yes, he did try to fight back. Yes, he tried to do everything that he could, but it was all coming from this really deep fear and panic state. Of course, if I was to come across a Demogorgon, yeah, I'd probably be the same, feeling almost a little bit helpless. But there's some hints kind of later on in the episode of where his brother was supposed to be home to watch him, but he chose to do other things instead of be there for him. And then the mom was working really, really late, and they didn't even notice that he wasn't even there until the morning of, which is starting to set the seed of there's been some isolation. And as the seasons go, it's still showing a little bit of that dynamic. So what this is showing here is that when you're in a really deep, hyper state of fear and panic, you are a lot more susceptible. He also fell off his bike and hurt himself a little bit too. So we know that when you're physically vulnerable, emotionally vulnerable, you're more vulnerable to external influences. So when you look at this from just more of like a bigger, broader perspective, if you look at the upside down, like a negative influence, when you're constantly in this emotional state, you become even more susceptible to things like that. So it's just kind of giving that permission slip that external influence can land in your system and can harm you. So then he gets pulled into the upside down, and then he's very disoriented. He's cut off from the real world physically, mentally, and this is setting the stage for a psychic parasite known as the mind flare influence that followed after this. So when he's trapped in the upside down, it's both physical as well as it is mental. The longer he stays, the more autonomy and energy and sense of self are diminished by the shadow. Now, anyone who's done personal development knows everything about shadow work. So here's a cool little parallel. The upside down can represent the shadow mind and aspect of ourselves. And when you look at it like a parallel dimension, the upside down, this is the lower step of the astral plane. This is where a lot of lost souls and all of these things that we fear and create with our minds actually exist. So my belief is that we only have these evil beings and entities and things like that because we've given them some level of permission. Anything that you can think of literally exists spiritually, right? And this all comes from our own state of mental cohesion, our own fears, but also think about how that could be such a beautiful thing if we're all coherent with positive thoughts, right? So again, the shadow, the upside down is like the shadow work that we face, like our own internal fears. And that is the thing that you start seeing with Will, is that the more that he starts working through his fear, the more powerful he becomes. And same later on with 11, but I'm not going to shadow too much into that now. And of course, isolation, when it's in extremes, will always make a person more susceptible in some dynamic, right? So fear and isolation, they really play big time on what you feel is, possible or not possible. And this also mirrors real life parasite influence when it can come from people or even microbes in some sense, right? Because the more you're in like a fear state, chronic stress, your immune system is actually lowered. So you're actually more vulnerable to disease and flus and viruses, bacteria, things of that nature. So something really big to take away from this, right? You are more influenced the more that you're in this hyper state of fight, flight, not able to rest, being in the sympathetic nervous system, right? And when you allow your emotions to take over, that sense of powerlessness and helplessness really do affect how much you're able to be influenced. So even think of that like in your day to day with people around you. How are you influenced? How are you influenced by what's on the TV, movies, news? It's all around us. So this all plays on when you feel trapped or powerless or cut off. Your inner defense will actually weaken. And again, easier for that external influence to consume your attention, energy, time, even sense of self. So let's talk about the solution because there's so many people out there that are in isolation to an unhealthy aspect, right? So it's one thing to not want influence and to really be in charge of your energy. It's another thing to completely cut yourself off from even all the good stuff in life. So that's the other thing is that Will was cut off essentially from that sense of love and connection. The solution here is to actually reclaim your authority. So Will's path to survival, it was not just about physically escaping the upside down. It was about reasserting his mind, his will, his reconnection to the real world, to reality, right? And Joyce, his mom, actually uses lights. His friends actually support him. He focuses on resisting fear, which allows to pull him and his consciousness and agency back from the upside down. So he's able to actually start connecting with those on the other side. So the act of choosing, the act of remembering, the act of fighting mentally was the key step for him in breaking that parasitic grip. So again, some examples here. He was alone in the upside down, which is susceptibility. So wandering, getting lost down there, getting pulled and trapped. It will grow stronger when you actually feel powerless. The mind flare influence would reach into his mind, disorienting him, manipulating the environment, preying on his fears. So not only is he trapped physically, but also mentally, which is how these types of thought influences and thought forms actually take hold. So the connection to loved ones is a part of reclaiming your autonomy and authority. So one is working through those fears that are currently taking hold. The second thing is to actually use those that you love and trust, like those who actually love you in return, where you have that mutual reciprocation and agreements there. But he focused on the love and connection that he really had in his life. And that actually helped him work through some fear. It also helped him to realize what his own internal power was. And once you realize what your own internal power is, which is all sacral chakra, or sorry, not sacral, solar plexus chakra, it really starts to bring up like how much capability you really have, that you're not able to be influenced, you're not able to be mind controlled. So just think of that in some different perspective, not just in your own personal life there, but how this can help you in terms of things like propaganda and being fed information that just is not true or is twisted or owned in some way. Like you can look at this and take this information, apply it to your personal life, professional, friends, but even bigger from more of a societal standpoint as well. Because when you're in this deep fear state, when you're in this helpless, powerless state, you are more susceptible to influence on a wide variety of scales, not just from friends and family, but also think of marketing tactics and everything else. So this is season one. And season one, again, is about reclaiming autonomy from that psychic parasite, where isolation and fear amplify vulnerability, connection, courage, and willpower are actually the antidotes, right? So knowing that nothing can actually have that sense of influence over you, and that even on a spiritual level, these beings and spirits and entities can't actually harm you. And really, what they hook into is some internal wounds that haven't been fully healed. So, what you can look at these things like is like the way to understand what you haven't healed externalized. So, they can be a teacher, and you can start to look at this a little bit more from a neutral perspective. But how are you going to apply that into your life today? So if you enjoyed this, please like, share, tag a Stranger Things fan. And if there's anything in season 1 or later seasons that you'd like me to touch on or any characters, please do, and I will do so. But I will be continuing on with part 2, 3, and 4. And enjoy watching Stranger Things tonight.